The date October 12 has been much on my mind this year. It was on this day in 1936 that the fascist forces of General Francisco Franco celebrated El Día de la Raza, the Hispanic world's alternate version of Columbus Day. Some 3 months earlier, Franco had begun a right-wing insurrection against the elected government of the Republic. His longest army soon controlled a large part of the country, including Salamanca. It was in the central hall of that ancient city's university, founded in 1218 and the most renowned institute of higher learning in the land, that the fascists commemorated their Day of the Race. In front of numerous dignitaries and emboldened by a mob of nationalist youth and legionnaires, Franco's friend and mentor General José Milanestre desecrated that temple of learning with 6 words: Abajo la inteligencia, viva la muerte, and with intelligence, long live death. That phrase, so paradoxical, so absurd, so idiotic, would have been laughable had it not occurred in a Europe where Nazis were burning libraries and, along with their Italian allies, pushing innumerable artists, scientists, and writers into exile. In Spain, those words resonated no less ominously. Only weeks earlier, Federico García Lorca, one of the greatest writers in the Spanish language, a poet and playwright who had deployed the many angels of intelligence, had been executed in Granada by a nationalist death squad. Many more intellectuals were assassinated in the years that followed, along with peasants, workers, and students who had learned under the Republic to think and speak for themselves. When I was growing up in Chile in the 50s and 60s, I was convinced that such a cataclysm could not happen to us. I was sure that intelligence was obviously to be hailed and death just as obviously to be deplored. The 1973 coup against the democratic government of Salvador Allende changed all that. Books were turned to ashes, musicians were shot, scientists and educators were tortured. Meanwhile, the military, inspired by the same fundamentalism and loathing that had raged in Franco's Spain, derided intelligence and reveled in death. The intelligentsia, they insisted, was to blame for Chile's upheavals and supposed decline. Today, Chile is democratic and monuments are lifted to those who were martyred by the dictatorship. The generals who ordered such horrors are reviled and some have even been jailed for their atrocities. If I now feel compelled to evoke the words Milanestre used 81 years ago in Salamanca, it is because they have gained a bizarre relevance in today's America. The resurgence of nationalism in our time has not yet reached the homicidal extremes it did when Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco misruled their lands, but the United States still faces an assault on rational discourse, scientific knowledge, and objective truth. And this war on intelligence, too, despite the edulcorated pieties that come from those who carry it out, will lead to many deaths. There has always been a disturbing strand of anti-intellectualism in American life, the very title of Richard Hofstadter's 1963 book, but never has an occupant of the White House exhibited such a toxic mix of ignorance and mendacity, such lack of intellectual curiosity and disregard for rigorous analysis, despite his untested boast that his IQ is one of the highest, certainly higher than Obama's and a host of other worthies. The experts are terrible, Donald Trump said during his campaign. Look at the mess we're in with all these experts that we have. It is hardly surprising, then, that his administration is overstocked with know-nothing fundamentalists. Across the board, he has appointed amateurs who are hostile to science and sport obscurantism. In Scott Pruitt, the perfect person, approved by the fossil fuel industry, to enact his suicidal anti-environmental policies on the domestic level. The Dark Prince of the EPA, a department he seems to wish to dismantle, is perhaps the most dangerously ill-informed of Trump's appointees. He has already insisted that carbon dioxide is not the primary contributor to the global warming that we see, withdrawn requests for oil and gas companies to report sources of methane emissions, rejected a petition to ban the pesticide chlorpyrifos, and gutted the Climate Science Advisory Council of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the body that studies rising sea levels and helps predict hurricanes. Abajo la inteligencia, viva la muerte. Still more urgently apocalyptic than these policies is the oppressive ignorance, to borrow Tom Nichols' phrase from The Death of Expertise, President Trump has displayed when he threatened to totally destroy North Korea. Trump evidently neither knows nor cares that such an action would violate the Geneva Conventions, the conclusions of the Nuremberg Tribunal, and the UN Charter. It is frightening that this felonious stupidity has not aroused more revulsion among U.S. citizens. Until recently, about 80% of Republicans who voted for Trump still supported him, and 55% of Americans believe he is intelligent, although that is the only favorable result for Trump in an otherwise dismal report card of negative views. In our struggle against such benightedness, perhaps we can draw inspiration from the response of one of those present in Salamanca when Milanistri launched his hymn to death, a response from the man who was, in fact, the intended target of the fascist general's rage. Miguel de Unamuno, then Spain's most eminent intellectual, answered his antagonist with the words vencereus, porque teneas a broad fuerza bruta, mas no convencereus. You will beat us because you have more than enough brute force, but you will not persuade us. Even in those dire circumstances, Unamuno managed to play on words, opposing the verb vencer to conquer to the verb convencer to convince. You will conquer but you will not convince. Unamuno's defiance was fearless. If he had not been escorted from the premises by General Franco's wife, he faced a beating from fascist thugs. Today, without such immediate fear of violence, we can adapt Unamuno's words. We must trust that the intelligence that has allowed humanity to stave off death, make medical and engineering breakthroughs, reach the stars, build wondrous temples, and write complex tales will save us again. We must nurse the conviction that we can use the gentle graces of science and reason to prove that the truth cannot be vanquished so easily. To those who would repudiate intelligence, we must say you will not conquer and we will find a way to convince. This article originally appeared in the New York Review of Books.